Shaggy the Rec coming to you live and direct from the Eastgate Public Library, where today we're going to try and cram in 45-minute reading session, or I guess a 42-minute reading session of George Orwell's 1984. Why? Because we're already like a big chunk of the way into it. Gang. Shouts out everybody over at the r/alternate history hub Discord. Shouts out Don't Watch Continue. Shouts out Octawave. Shouts out Against the World G. And everybody else too. I know I got love for you. Hold up. We got now on a roll though. So we right here at part 2. The very beginning of part 2. And try and see how much I can get in 40 minutes. Wish me luck. It was the middle of the morning, and Winston had left his cubicle to go to the laboratory. A solitary figure was coming toward him from the other end of the long, brightly lit corridor. It was the girl with dark hair. 4 days had gone past since the evening when he had run into her outside the junk shop. As she came near, he saw that her right arm was in a sling, not noticeable at a distance because it was the same color as her overalls. Probably she had crushed her hand while swinging around one of the big kaleidoscopes on which the plots of the novels were roughed in, as it was common accident in the fiction department. They were perhaps 4 meters apart when the girl stumbled and almost fell flat on her face. A sharp cry of pain was wrung out of her. She must have fallen right on the injured arm. Winston stopped short. The girl had risen to her knees. Her face had turned a milky yellow color against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. Her eyes were fixed on his, with an appealing expression that looked more like fear than pain. A curious emotion stirred in Winston's heart. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him. In front of him also was a human creature in pain and perhaps with a broken bone. He had instinctively started forward to help her. In the moment when he had seen her fall on her bandaged arm, it had been as though he felt the pain in his own body. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing, my arm. It'll be all right in a second." She spoke as though her heart were fluttering. She certainly turned very pale. "But you haven't broken anything?" "No, I'm all right. I'm hurt for the moment, that's all." She let her hand free out to help him, and he helped her up. She had regained some of her color and appeared very much better. "It's nothing," she repeated shortly. "I only gave my wrist a bit of a bang. Thanks, comrade." And with that she walked on in the direction in which she had been going as briskly as though it had been really nothing. The whole incident could not have taken as much as half a minute. Not to let one's feelings appear in one's face was a habit that had been acquired, the status of an instinct. And in any case, they had been standing straight in front of the telescreen when the thing happened. Nevertheless, it had been very difficult not to betray a momentary surprise, for in the 2 or 3 seconds while he was helping the girl up, he had slipped something into his hand. There was no question that she had done it intentionally. It was something small and flat. As he passed through the lavatory door, he transferred it to his pocket and felt it with the tips of his fingers. It was a scrap of paper folded into a square. While he stood at the urinal, he managed with a little more fingering to get it unfolded. Obviously, there must be a message of some kind written on it. For a moment, he was tempted to take it into one of the water closets and read it at once. But that would be a shocking folly, as he well knew. There was no place where you could be more certain that telescreens were continuously watching. He went back to his cubicle, sat down, threw the fragment of paper casually amongst the other papers on the desk, put on his spectacles, and hitched the speakwrite toward him. 5 minutes, he told himself. 5 minutes at the very least. His heart bumped in his breast with frightening loudness. Fortunately, the piece of work he was engaged on was mere routine, the rectification of a long list of figures, not needing close attention. Whatever was written on the paper, it must have some kind of political meaning. So far as he could see, there were 2 possibilities. One much more likely was that the girl was an agent of the thought police, just as he had feared. He did not know why the thought police should choose to deliver their messages in such a fashion, but perhaps they had their reasons. The thing that was written on paper might be a threat, a summons, an order to commit suicide, a trap by some description. But there was another, wilder possibility that kept rising its head, though he tried vainly to suppress it. This was that the message did not come from the thought police at all, but rather some kind of underground organization. Perhaps the Brotherhood existed after all. Perhaps the girl was a part of it. No doubt the idea was absurd, but it had sprung into his mind at the very instant of feeling the scrap of paper in his hand. It was not till a couple minutes later that the order, the other more probable explanation, occurred to him. Even now, through his intellect, telling him that the message probably meant death, still that not what he believed, and the unreasonable hope persisted, and his heart banged, and with it was difficulty that he kept his voice from trembling as he murmured his fingers to the speak right. He rolled up to complete a bundle of work and slid it into the pneumatic tube. 8 minutes had gone by. He readjusted his spectacles on his nose, sighed, and drew the next batch of work towards him, with a scrap of paper on top of it. He flattened it out. On it was written in large uniformed handwriting, "I love you." For several seconds he was too stunned even to throw the incriminating thing into the memory hole. When he did so, although he knew very well the danger of showing too much interest, he could not resist reading it once again, just to make sure the words were really there. For the rest of the morning it was very difficult to work. What was even worse was having to focus his mind on a series of nagging jobs, was the need to conceal his agitation from the telescreen. He felt as though a fire were burning in his belly. Lunched in hot, crowded, noise-filled canteen was torment. He had hoped to be alone for a little while during the lunch hour, but as bad luck would have it, the imbecile Parsons flopped down beside him, the tang of sweat almost defeating the tinny smell of stew, and kept up a stream of talk about the proportions for hate week. He was particularly enthusiastic about a papier-mâché model of Big Brother's head 2 meters wide, which was being made for the occasion by his daughter's troop of spies. The irritating thing was that, in the racket of voices, Winston could hardly hear what Parsons was saying, and was constantly having to ask some fortuitous remark to be repeated. Just once he caught a glimpse of the girl at a table with 2 other girls at the far end of the room. She appeared not to have seen him, and he did not look in her direction again. The afternoon was more bearable. Immediately after lunch there arrived a delicate, difficult piece of work, which would take several hours and necessitated putting everything else aside. It consisted in falsifying a series of production reports of 2 years ago in such a way as to cast discredit on a prominent member of the inner party who was now under a cloud. This was the kind of thing that Winston was good at, and for more than 2 hours he succeeded in shutting the girl out of his mind altogether. Then the memory of her face came back, along with it a raging, intolerable desire to be alone. Until he could be alone, it was impossible to think with this new development out. Tonight was one of his nights at the community center. He wolfed another tasteless meal in the canteen, hurried off to the center, took part in some foolery of a discussion group, played 2 games of table tennis, swallowed several glasses of gin, and sat for half an hour through a lecture entitled "Ingsoc in Relation to Chess." His soul writhed with boredom, but for once he had no impulse to shrink at his evening at the center. To shirk his evening at the center. At the sight of the words "I love you," the desire to stay alive had welled up in him, and taking the minor risk suddenly seemed stupid. It was not till 23 hours, when he was home and in bed, in the darkness, where you were safe even from the telescreen so long as you kept silent, that he was able to think continuously. It was a physical problem that had to be solved. how to get in touch with the girl and arrange a meeting. He had not considered any longer the possibility that she might be laying some kind of trap for him. He knew that was not so because of her unmistakable agitation when she handed him the note. Obviously, she had been frightened out of her wits, as well she might be, nor had the idea of refusing her advances even crossed his mind. Only 5 nights ago he had contemplated smashing her skull in with a cobblestone, but that was of no importance. He thought of her naked, youthful body, as he had seen in his dream, and he imagined her a fool like the rest of them, her head stuffed with lies and hatred, her belly full of ice. A kind of fever seized through him at the thought that he might lose her. The youthful body might slip away from him. What he feared more than anything else was that she would simply change her mind if he did not get in touch with her quickly. But the physical difficulty of meeting was enormous. It was like trying to make a move in chess when you were already made it. Whenever way you turned, a telescreen faced you. Actually, all of the possible ways of communicating with her had occurred to him within a few